Hello everyone, my name is Chad Stein,
Kari Anderson.
Orla Ray.
and today we will be presenting on our ethical audits of three companies, UPMC, PwC, and the Office of General Counsel. I'm going to begin by talking about our analysis of PwC. So what is PwC? The biggest arm of their business is in auditing. However, they also do work in tax and consulting advisory and risk assurance. We found it interesting they were named one of Fortune 100's best companies to work for nearly a decade, 2005 to 2014. This speaks to the reputation they've built up over time and the reputation they want to maintain. The two employees that we met with at PwC on site were Nancy Dilthey, who is the campus sourcing manager, and Cody Bailey, who works in their assurance department. So ethics are very important to PwC. We've found this was evident in their interviewing process. Before they even begin the selection process, they follow many different regulations to make the process fair. These include school rules, government rules, and even PwC's own rules. They also make sure that their job postings are fair and consistent. At the interview itself, they like to ask a lot of behavioral questions in order to get a feel for the candidate's ethical or moral compass. Once they've brought a candidate on board as an employee, they do a lot of training to make sure that this employee will live up to the ethical standards that they set at their company. This includes what's called the Experienced Hire Training Seminar. This is a 3-day conference where PwC communicates to their employees the values that they expect and the level of ethical conduct they expect at their company. They also have ethical modules that employees must complete at their desk at the office. There are numerous ways that PwC evaluates their employees and makes sure that they are continuing to live up to ethical standards. For example, they have what are called career coaches. These coaches will sit down with the employee at the beginning, middle, and end of each year to develop goals and a plan or a track on which that employee can achieve those goals. Another interesting fact is they have a company app. And on this app, there are the names of every single employee at PwC, and other employees can rate their coworkers and make evaluations on these employees. This is another way that the PwC keeps their employees honest and keeps them living up to the ethical conduct standards they expect. If an ethical issue is to arise at PwC, employees are encouraged to reference the Code of Conduct. There they can find questions to ask themselves. For example, is it against PwC or professional standards? Does it feel right? Is it legal? Will it reflect negatively on you, the employee, or PwC, the company? Who else could be affected by this? These are just a few of many different questions that are in the Code of Conduct. What's interesting is if a red flag is drawn when the employee is asking themselves these questions, they are encouraged to look to and call the PwC compliance hotline. This hotline is very crucial to upholding an ethical standard because it allows for the whistleblower to remain anonymous. As we discussed in class, this is very important, having to do with whistleblowers. Cody Bailey talked to a great extent about the independence assurance confirmation. This strategy is in place to avoid conflicts of interest. Since he's over at the assurance branch of the company, he explained that it is a very deep analysis of a client before they bring them on board to make sure that the company PwC has no relationship with the client or the client's interest. This can help avoid conflicts of interest. So also in the Code of Conduct is the framework for ethical decision making, and this can be explained very simply as a 5-step process. Recognize the event, decision, or issue, think before you act, decide on a course of action, test your decision, and proceed with confidence. This wraps up the formal structures that PwC has in place to encourage good ethics in their workplace. But they also have very important informal resources. The first of which is the peer mentor. And this is a very informal mentor. They're basically meant to answer very basic questions such as what would be an appropriate thing to wear to this PwC event, for example. Questions of that nature. The most important informal structure is the ethical language. Nancy described this as the overall culture or atmosphere at PwC. For example, Cody explained how working over in the assurance department, it's very important that those employees are careful with what they say in the workplace. This is because they know a lot of sensitive client information and they need to avoid the conflicts of interest that I talked about. When we asked Cody and Nancy to describe this environment with 1 or 2 words, Cody said dynamic and Nancy said teamwork oriented and professional. We want to highlight professional because professionalism in the workplace can just reinforce the ethical culture as well. Wrapping things up, we're going to talk about corporate social responsibility at PwC. When we asked Cody and Nancy about that, it was a resounding yes. This is a very crucial part of our company and what we stand for. Arguably, the biggest impact they make is in philanthropy and specifically the Earn Your Future campaign. This basically educates young people on how to budget their money and finance their money in order to retire at a nice age. They also have Swim for Malaria and Stuff the Box, which we saw on display when we visited on site. They also help out through community service. PwC allots 10 hours per employee per year to, instead of coming into work, rather go and volunteer at a charity of their choosing. Finally, concerning environmental efforts, they have a goal to reduce carbon emissions by 45% by fiscal year 2016. That wraps up my analysis of the PwC ethics. I'm now going to pass it to Orla to talk about UPMC.
So we met with Alicia Romanelli to discuss the policies and ethical culture at UPMC. Alicia is a project manager in HR. Being the second best hospital system in Pennsylvania and the 10th in the country, UPMC is committed not only to caring for its patients, but upholding a standard of ethical responsibility. Employees at UPMC are made aware of this commitment to ethics from the very beginning of their employment. During the interview process, recruiters use value-based behavioral interviewing questions that align with the values of the company, which include quality and safety, dignity and respect, caring and listening, responsibility and integrity, excellence, and innovation. Creating safe work environments and treating individuals with dignity and respect to the highest degree is a crucial aspect of assessing who they will hire. This continues into employee orientation, where ethics training and workshops are enforced. During this orientation, employees are also made aware of outlets to report any unethical behavior, for example, the ethics hotline. To ensure ethical compliance continues in employees' day-to-day work environment, annual performance evaluations are completed by HR. 50% of the evaluation is assessing whether employees are upholding the company's values, and then these assessments are used to figure out who will receive promotions or assignments. UPMC uses a 3-step warning system if an employee must be reviewed for deviating from the company's values. Employees receive 2 written warnings before reaching the 3rd step of legal action or termination. In terms of corporate social responsibility, UPMC is one of the largest providers of charitable care for patients in the country. For example, they have programs that give patients a place to stay if they cannot afford hospitality. Another example of UPMC giving back to the community is their involvement in workplace development projects throughout Pittsburgh, which helps people get access to employment and healthcare. Beyond the healthcare side, philanthropy and environmental awareness are stressed at every level of corporate. For instance, even as an intern, Alicia was involved in a volunteering project that involved cleaning up Pittsburgh bridges, where the CFO was also present. UPMC is heavily involved in the United Way campaign and even have a competition between departments to see who can raise the most money. UPMC is making efforts to become more environmentally friendly through a lean supply chain, recycling in their offices and hospitals, and the Donald D. Wolfe Jr. Center for Quality, Safety, and Innovation, which focuses on finding innovative ways to supporting UPMC's environmental efforts. While there is no formal chief ethical officer or ombudsman at UPMC, values-based training is implemented at all levels of HR and management. Employees are made aware of the ethics code, which is reviewed regularly and posted on an internal site for employees. Ethics training is mandatory and annual, and there is also quarterly meetings facilitated with upper management in which lower-level employees can have a Q&A session about topics concerning ethics. The open and transparent nature at UPMC reflects their value-based work culture. The commitment to ethical culture in UPMC's formal system carries over to the informal culture. Unethical language, harassment, and discrimination would not be tolerated in or out of office events. While informal settings such as office happy hours may change the aesthetics in terms of employee interactions, The commitment to respect and dignity is still present no matter what. Now I'll pass it over to Carrie to talk about Pitt's Office of General Counsel.
Thank you, Orla. So what is the Office of General Counsel? It is an in-house law firm in the University of Pittsburgh. So it represents Pitt in legal proceedings. It also prepares and reviews Pitt contracts and agreements and provides legal advice to the university. We spoke specifically with Alan Garfinkel of Senior Legal Counsel. For interviewing, training, and promotion at the Office of General Counsel, when interviewing in the office, they check resumes and references for previous workplace behavior to make sure there's no unethical activity. In terms of training, the employees are required to complete continuing education programs as well in addition to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania requirements, which mandate that employees must dedicate 2 hours of the year to ethics training. No specific training occurs between employees and management, so there's no sit-down ethics talk with managers with new hires. However, when promoting, employees must act ethically, or they could be fired or otherwise disciplined based on the standards of the bar associations. We also looked at performance in the Office of General Counsel. In this office, lawyers are expected to act as professionals at all times. Since all lawyers that are hired must be members of the American or Pennsylvania Bar Associations, they are expected to act as professionals as well as members of the bar. So they must self-regulate their behavior to uphold the ethical standards of the bar associations. Ethical violations can potentially lead to an employee being disbarred or potentially losing their license to practice as a lawyer. So this consequence often tends to divert unethical actions of employees. During performance evaluations, if employees are not up to the codes of the bar and up to the codes of the university, they may be terminated. There is no particular daily discussion on ethics. However, there is always a discussion on ethics when the issue arises so that it can be addressed properly. The office's corporate social responsibility is not necessarily formal. They don't have a formal CSR doctrine. However, there is an emphasis on informal programs in this organization. Community outreach at the office includes attorneys against hunger, food drives, neighborhood legal services, pro bono cases, and giving to charities, some of which are individual activities that are encouraged by the organization. In terms of sustainability, programs that aim to reduce energy consumption are prominent across the university and have trickled down into the systems of the Office of General Counsel as well. When we asked about whistleblowing, speaking with Alan, he told us that there was a university hotline that addresses all university employees, in addition to or including the Office of General Counsel. And this is an anonymous option for employees to report violations. An alternative method to this hotline would be bringing ethical concerns to the Chief Legal Officer, the CLO, or the Chancellor. Ethical misconduct is often disciplined swiftly and justly, and it tends to arise in specific areas such as university research and plagiarism. For these particular purposes, the Office of General Counsel has a Research Integrity Officer in addition to the University Research Compliance Committee, which both ensure that researchers can abide by ethical standards. It should, however, be noted that these particular committees and officers monitor the entire university and all of its employees, as well as the Office of General Counsel's employees. In the informal ethical systems at the office include rituals, socialization norms, ethical expectations, and language. For the rituals, lawyers often tell stories of victories and defeats. A dress code is an example of a socialization norm. Under the old Chancellor and the old CLO, it was an unstated norm that the employees would wear suits. However, when the new CLO came in and said, "I don't care what you wear," it became less of a norm to dress up every day in a formal suit, and it was a little more encouraged to dress up for things like business meetings instead. And ethical expectations and assumptions exist in the Office of General Counsel, as everyone is a member of the Bar Association, and so they must act as a professional and abide by those ethical standards, as well as using ethical language and adhering to the Code of Civility and Conduct and maintaining respect for one another. Now Orla will discuss the similarities and differences between formal systems in our companies.
Thanks, Carrie. So in hiring and training practices, UPMC and PwC were very similar, as they provided in-depth ethics training and used value-based and behavioral interview questions, whereas the Office of General Counsel primarily relied on expectations of the bar associations external to the organization. In terms of a formal code of ethics and policies, PwC has a hard copy of the Code of Conduct as well as a transparency report that is distributed to all employees. UPMC's formal Code of Conduct is not distributed regularly, but is uploaded to their internal site. And the office relies on an unwritten Code of Conduct enforced by federal regulations. Speaking to formal ethical positions, PwC was the only company we audited that had a formal ethics and business conduct committee. While UPMC and the office did not, ethical compliance was a key focus of HR and management, enforced through regular training. With communicating ethical policies, the companies had some differences due to their difference in corporate business. PwC had strong communication through regular distribution of the Code of Conduct. UPMC had constant conversation between all levels of employees through their internal website, Q&A, and annual training. The office had some employee training, but communication was mostly through regulations and their duty as a bar member. Rewards and punishments had formal systems in every company we audited. All three companies used employees' ethical compliance as a guidance for rewards and punishments. If employees at any of these firms commit unethical or unlawful behavior, they could be considered for discipline or termination. In terms of whistleblowing, all three companies had an outlet for whistleblowing through a 24-hour anonymous hotline, which we found that whistleblowing was not just allowed but strongly encouraged by all levels at HR. And now I'll pass it over to Carrie to talk about the informal systems.
Thank you, Orla. So some of the socialization norms at the different companies were very similar. All of the companies had some form of socialization, which often included outside of the office events. In addition, they had similar language expectations as well. So while employees might interact in these different informal settings outside of work, there are still formal values of respect and integrity that are upheld, even though they're in an informal setting, similar as to if they were in a formal work setting. Relationships in the company were also similar. Since ethical awareness is still present in these informal events, it only adds to the formal ethical culture of the workplace in these different companies. Power distance was an aspect of informal systems that varied throughout the companies. In PwC, there was a buddy, mentor, and coaching system that was available to employees, but there was a high level of separation between low-level employees and high-level management. In UPMC, they didn't have a formal mentor system, but there were events such as volunteering and Q&As that allowed lower-level employees to interact with these upper-level managers. Finally, in the office, there was no mentor system, but employees could feel comfortable contacting the CLO or the chancellor to report different ethical misconduct. They could also access through the anonymous hotline. I will now pass it off to Chad to discuss CSR.
Thank you, Carrie. So while PwC and UPMC had a high level of commitment to giving back to the community through volunteer events all over Pittsburgh, we felt the Office of General Counsel had the greatest environmental focus, one that reflects the University of Pittsburgh reputation and commitment to being on the forefront of sustainability. UPMC and PwC did show a commitment to sustainability through programs such as office-wide recycling. However, we felt there was still room for them to grow in this area and truly reflect the size and scope of the university's environmental initiatives such as One Pit, One Planet. We'd like to thank you for listening to our presentation, and we hope you learned a lot about the companies that we audited.